He promised paradise, he delivered hell. The year is 1978. Deep within the Guyanese jungle, a man named Jim Jones presided over a community he called Jonestown. For many, it was a sanctuary. For others, a prison without walls. This wasn't just a remote agricultural commune. It was the culmination of decades of a carefully constructed illusion, built brick by painstaking brick, on the backs of his devoted followers. But before the jungle, before the suicides, before the name Jonestown became synonymous with mass delusion and horror, there was James Warren Jones. Born in Crete, Indiana in 1931, his childhood was marked by poverty and a fervent, almost obsessive, interest in religion. He was a boy who felt destined for something grand, even if he wasn't yet sure what that grand would be. From a young age, Jones exhibited a peculiar charisma, a magnetic pull that drew others to him. He'd preach to barnyard animals and neighborhood children, practicing sermons long before he had a congregation. This early theatricality was a sign of things to come, a prelude to the master manipulator he would become. By the 1950s, Jones was a full-fledged preacher, but not in the conventional sense. He founded the Wings of Deliverance Church, later renamed the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. His message wasn't just about salvation. It was a potent blend of Pentecostal fervor, socialist ideals, and racial equality radical concepts for conservative post-war America. He preached against racism and poverty, attracting a largely black congregation and white liberals disillusioned with societal norms. Jones presented himself as a savior, a righteous man fighting for the downtrodden. He even ran a soup kitchen and nursing homes, earning genuine respect and admiration from many. But beneath this benevolent facade, a darker agenda was taking root. Jones began to demand absolute loyalty. He claimed to possess healing powers, performing staged miracles to solidify his divine image. He wasn't just a preacher, he was becoming a prophet, then a god. The People's Temple grew, first in Indianapolis, then expanding to California in the 1970s, with major churches in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Jones strategically moved his operations, seeking to escape scrutiny and build a larger, more devoted following in more liberal environments. This expansion marked a critical turning point. He established what he called socialist utopias within the temple, where members pooled all their assets, lived communally, and worked for the collective good. On the surface, it sounded idealistic. In practice, it meant Jones controlled every aspect of their lives, from their finances to their relationships. The love-bombing phase, where new recruits were showered with affection and acceptance, soon gave way to stricter controls. Defectors reported public humiliations, severe physical punishments, and psychological manipulation. Jones's paranoia intensified, and he began to see enemies everywhere: the government, former members, the media. To escape what he perceived as growing persecution and to build his ultimate paradise, Jones announced the creation of Jonestown, an agricultural commune in Guyana. He promised a socialist haven, free from American corruption, racism, and capitalism. It was the promised land, a place where his followers could finally be truly safe. Hundreds of his most devoted followers, many elderly or impoverished, liquidated their assets and moved to the remote South American nation. They believed in Jim Jones. They believed in his vision. They believed he would protect them from a world they increasingly feared. Life in Jonestown was harsh. Days were spent toiling in the fields under the scorching sun, often with inadequate food and sanitation. Jones's speeches, broadcast over loudspeakers, became increasingly erratic and filled with doomsday prophecies. Sleep deprivation, poor diet, and constant fear chipped away at their resolve. Jones controlled all communication, intercepted mail, and punished anyone who questioned his authority. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The paradise they'd been promised transformed into a totalitarian regime, a prison disguised as a commune. The utopia was now inescapable. Defections from Jonestown became increasingly difficult, and reports from concerned relatives in the U.S. began to surface. Stories of abuse, forced labor, and Jones's deteriorating mental state reached the ears of concerned politicians and human rights advocates. In November 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan, a California representative, traveled to Jonestown with a delegation of journalists and concerned relatives. His mission: to investigate the allegations and determine the truth of what was happening behind the jungle's green curtain. Initially, Jones staged a welcoming reception, a desperate attempt to portray Jonestown as a peaceful, thriving community. But as the delegation prepared to leave, several members of the People's Temple secretly approached Ryan, begging to return to the United States with him. The illusion was shattered. On November 18, 1978, as Ryan and his group prepared to depart from the nearby airstrip with 15 defectors, they were ambushed by armed People's Temple members. Congressman Ryan, 3 journalists, and 1 defector were brutally murdered. The first act of the final tragedy had begun. Back in Jonestown, Jones knew his world was collapsing. He gathered his followers, nearly 1,000 men, women, and children, for a final, chilling assembly. This was no longer about paradise. It was about revolutionary suicide, a term he'd drilled into them for years through countless white nights, or suicide drills. Jones convinced them that the U.S. government would torture them for the airstrip murders. Their only escape, he preached, was to die together, a final act of defiance against a hostile world. Cyanide-laced Flavor Aid was prepared. Children were given it first. The chilling audio recordings from that day reveal the horrifying reality. The cries of children, the desperate pleas of mothers, and Jones's increasingly frantic voice, urging them on. It wasn't a peaceful communal act. It was a desperate, terrifying struggle for survival that few could win. By the time Guyanese authorities arrived, the scene was one of unimaginable horror. 909 people lay dead, including Jim Jones himself. It was the largest single loss of American civilian lives in a non-natural disaster until 9/11. The legacy of Jonestown remains a stark warning about the seductive power of charisma, the dangers of unquestioning obedience, and the devastating consequences when a leader's paranoia consumes an entire community. Jim Jones didn't just build a commune. He built a death trap, piece by carefully constructed piece. The silent ascent of Jim Jones wasn't silent at all. It was filled with the promises of paradise, the whispers of dissent, and ultimately, the screams of terror. And in understanding its origins, we might just understand how to prevent its recurrence. Next, we unravel the dark secrets behind Heaven's Gate and their cosmic exit.